At 5 o'clock in the morning, Lucas Hayes pushed open the wrong door inside Ravenholt Global, and a silk blouse slipped from Scarlet Vale's shoulders and pooled on the polished marble. The most feared CEO in the city turned toward him, her stare cold enough to end a career in a single second, and he already knew he was finished. Then her voice cracked barely a whisper across the silent office. "Please, don't go." Maintenance worker in a stained uniform, a billionaire half undressed before the biggest meeting of her life, and one impossible plea hanging between them. Lucas Hayes did not move. The silk blouse lay on the marble like spilled paint, and Scarlet Vale stood in the cold gray light of her own office with the bearing of a woman who had not slept in 3 nights. She did not reach for the fabric. She did not cover herself with anything except the silence stretched between them, and somehow that silence cost her more than the blouse ever could have. He looked down at his boots, black scuffed salt-stained from the loading bay, where he had been replacing a coolant line less than 10 minutes earlier. The work order had given him the wrong floor. The night supervisor had given him the wrong access code. And the door that should have led to a server closet had led him here to the 70th floor, to a woman whose name appeared on the side of the building. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Lucas said. The words came out flat, more confession than apology. "I'll go. Please." Her voice cracked low, ashamed of itself. "Don't go." She turned from him then and walked to the window, every motion controlled, as though even her humiliation had to be administered carefully. She lifted a charcoal blazer from the back of a chair, slid it on, and crossed her arms. The lining was the same shade as the bruises under her eyes. Lucas was 34 years old and had spent the last 7 of those years pretending he had no past worth mentioning. There had been a wife once, and a degree in mechanical engineering he never finished, and a small apartment with the kind of life inside it he never thought he'd lose. None of that survived the year he turned 27. What survived was the night shift, the toolbox, and the rule he had made for himself: keep your head down, take the overtime, and never under any circumstance speak first in a room you were not invited into. He broke that rule now because the woman in front of him looked like she might break apart if he didn't. "You haven't slept," Lucas said. Scarlett's shoulders moved. It was not quite a laugh. "Is it that visible?" "Only to someone who hasn't either." She turned her head just enough that he caught her profile, a face the magazines like to call surgical, as though she had been carved instead of born. Up close in the dim light before sunrise, she looked younger than the magazines made her look. She looked 31, which was exactly what she was. "There's a meeting at 7, she said. "Quarterly strategy review. The board has wanted my chair for 2 years now. Today they will ask for it again, more politely than usual." Her gaze drifted to the blouse on the floor and seemed almost surprised it was still there. "I was going to look perfect for them. Hairsuit, voice, the whole act. And then I came in. And then you came in." Lucas stepped forward slowly, the way a man approaches a wounded animal in a clearing. He bent down, picked up the blouse, folded it twice without looking at it, and laid it across the arm of the nearest chair. He did not look at her either. He simply did the smallest decent thing he could think of, and then straightened. When he raised his eyes, she was watching him. Not the way a CEO watches an employee, the way a person watches a stranger who has for 1 second treated them like a person. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucas. Hayes. Maintenance night shift." "Lucas." She tried the word the way she might try a foreign currency, weighing it. "I'm going to ask you something strange, and I would like you to say yes." "All right. Stay for 10 minutes. Don't speak unless I speak first. Don't fix anything. Don't call anyone. Just stand there." Her eyes finally met his, and they were not the eyes of the woman in the building lobby photograph. "I haven't had 10 minutes in a room with someone who didn't want something from me in a very long time." He stayed. He stood near the door hands at his sides, while she sat on the leather sofa across from him and held a glass of water she did not drink. She did not cry. He was almost certain she had forgotten how. But she breathed slow and deep. And after the 3rd minute, her shoulders dropped half an inch, and by the 7th minute, her eyes had closed, and he understood that this was what she had needed. Not advice, not comfort, just the proof of another person breathing in the same room without billing her for it. At 5:48, an alarm chimed on her desk. She opened her eyes, smoothed the blazer, and stood. Whatever had cracked in her was already being sealed back over layer by layer with the practiced speed of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. "Thank you, Lucas Hayes." "Ma'am." "Scarlett. In this office, when no one else is in it, my name is Scarlett." He nodded once, and then she was the CEO again, gathering papers, snapping a phone off its charger, walking past him without another glance. He left through the door he had come in, took the service elevator down to the basement, signed out at 6 o'clock sharp, and drove home in a truck whose heater had been broken since February. He told himself on the drive that he had hallucinated the whole thing. 3 days later, his work tablet pinged at 2 in the morning with a service request, flagged urgent. 70th floor. Lighting fixture executive office. Lucas sat in the truck for a full minute before he started the engine. The light fixture was fine. It had always been fine. Scarlett was standing under it in jeans and a sweater holding 2 cups of coffee, and the only thing wrong with the office was that she was alone in it again. "I owe you 10 minutes, she said. "I'd like to pay it back." It became a pattern after that. Once a week, sometimes twice. A flickering bulb that did not flicker. A sticky cabinet that opened on the first try. A thermostat whose only malfunction was that the woman beside it kept calling for it to be checked. Lucas brought the toolbox every time, because the toolbox was a reason, and the reason mattered to both of them in ways neither of them said out loud. They talked. Not about anything that would have impressed the magazines. He told her about the year he stopped studying engineering, the semester he sold his textbooks, to pay a rent he could no longer afford, the morning he signed divorce papers in a coffee shop because the lawyer's office had been too expensive. He told her these things in pieces the way a man unloads a truck 1 box at a time, with rests in between. She told him about her father, about inheriting an empire at 26 because a heart attack didn't care that she wasn't ready. About a board of directors who treated her like an heiress instead of a chief executive who scheduled meetings she was not told about, who answered her questions by looking past her shoulder at men who were not in the room. About Richard Crane, the executive vice president her father had trusted for 2 decades, who smiled in every photograph and disagreed with her in every memo. Richard was supposed to be the next one in this office, Scarlett said one night, looking at the wall instead of at Lucas. Everyone in the company knew it. Then my father changed his will. He left me the chair, the shares the votes. He never told Richard. She finally looked at him. Richard found out from the lawyer the same hour I did. Lucas thought about that for a long moment before he answered. Then you've been the only thing standing between him and what he believed was his for 2 years. Yes. And you're sitting alone in an office at 2 in the morning. Yes. He understood the shape of the thing then, even if he could not yet name it. The shape became sharper the following week. Scarlett mentioned almost in passing that a confidential proposal she had drafted had appeared in a competitor's pitch deck before her own board had seen it. She mentioned that her private calendar had been altered 3 times in a month, each time moving her out of meetings she had wanted to attend. She mentioned that 2 of her assistants had quit in the same quarter and would not return her calls. Lucas listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he set down his coffee, looked at the underside of her desk where a power strip lived, and asked her if anyone besides facilities had been allowed into her office without an escort in the past 6 months. She thought, Richard, twice, to collect documents while I was in Geneva. How long was he alone in here? Long enough. The next morning, Lucas did something he had not done in 7 years. He stayed past the end of his shift. He pulled the access logs for the 70th floor from the maintenance terminal in the basement, cross-referenced them against the badge data he was technically not supposed to be looking at, and found 3 after-hours entries that had been logged under cleaning staff ADs that did not correspond to any cleaning staff who had been on the schedule those nights. He sat in the basement for a long time after that, staring at the screen until the screen blurred. He could close the window. He could go home. He could keep his head down, take the overtime, and let the 70th floor handle its own quiet war. That was the rule. That was the rule that had kept him alive for 7 years. The rule that had built a wall between him and every consequence that had ever cost him anything. The other option was the woman who had asked a stranger to stand in her office at 5 o'clock in the morning because she could not bear one more minute of being alone with what was being done to her. He closed the window. He printed the logs. He folded the printout twice, slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and walked to the service elevator without telling himself why. When the doors opened on the 70th floor, Scarlett was already at her desk, in the same charcoal blazer, sharper than she had been the first morning the act fully back in place. She looked up at him over the rim of her glasses. "Lucas, I didn't call you." "I know." He set the printout on her desk. He did not sit down. He did not lower his voice. "Someone has been in this office at night, more than once, under names that don't match the people they belong to." He gave her a full second to read the first line. "Whatever's happening to you, ma'am, it isn't a run of bad luck, and you don't have a week left to keep pretending it is." She read. Her mouth did not move. Her hand did not shake. Only her eyes moved line by line until she reached the bottom of the page, and then they came back to him, and they were not the eyes of a CEO, and not the eyes of the woman who had asked him to stand by the door. They were the eyes of someone who had just been handed proof of something she had been afraid to say out loud for 2 years. "Why are you bringing me this, Lucas?" Scarlett asked. The question was quiet. It was the most dangerous question she had ever asked him. He thought about the answer for a long time. He thought about the truck in the parking lot. He thought about the rule. He thought about the 7 years he had spent pretending he did not have a stake in anything. "Because no one else is," he said. "And because you asked me to stay once. I am staying." Scarlett laid the printout flat on the desk between them. Outside the glass wall of her office, the city was beginning to turn from gray to gold, the way the city always did at 6 in the morning. Down on the street, 70 floors of glass below her, the rest of the world was waking up to a day that had nothing to do with either of them. Up here, in the cold quiet of her office, a different kind of day was being decided. "Then we should talk about what you've just walked into, Lucas Hayes," she said. "Because once you do, you don't get to walk back out." He set his toolbox down on the floor beside her desk. He did not pick it up again that morning. The toolbox sat by Scarlett's desk for the next 6 weeks, like a piece of furniture neither of them wanted to explain. Lucas kept his night shift hours and his badge access and his coverall, because changing any of that would have been a flare in the dark for whoever was watching them. By day, he slept 4 hours and read corporate filings he had borrowed from her tablet. By night, he listened to her think out loud, and the two of them built a list, names, dates. Cleaning staff IDs that had never belonged to anyone, memos that had been sent at 3 in the morning from terminals that should have been locked. They built it slowly, because Richard Crane had spent 2 decades inside Ravenholt Global and knew where every camera blinked and every log was kept. And Scarlett knew that if she moved too fast, he would smell it, before she had anything strong enough to cut him with. The world above the basement noticed Lucas before Scarlett wanted it to. The first time a senior vice president saw him in the executive corridor at 1 in the morning, the man stopped, took in the coverall and the badge, and asked Scarlett's chief of staff the next morning whether Miss Vale was screening her overnight visitors properly these days. The chief of staff repeated the question to Scarlett, with a face that was trying very hard not to mean anything. Scarlett told her in the voice that ended conversations that Mr. Hayes was assisting with a security review and would be on the 70th floor as often as he was needed. It did not stop. Each day, a different door took its small slice out of him. A board member's assistant looked at his hands when he held a coffee cup. A receptionist asked him 3 times whether he was certain he was allowed on this floor. An executive he had never spoken to brushed past him in the hallway and said low enough that only Lucas heard that men like him only ever wanted one thing from women like her, and that he should learn the name of the door he had walked in through. Lucas did not react. He had spent 7 years learning not to react. What surprised him was not the contempt he had expected the contempt the moment he set the printout on her desk. What surprised him was how Scarlett carried his contempt back to her office every night and was angrier about it than he was. "I should put you in a suit," she said, one night half to herself, looking at his sleeve, where someone had bumped a glass of wine on him at the elevator and not apologized. A suit would make it worse, not better. Lucas did not look up from the badge log on his tablet. A suit would mean I was pretending to be one of them. People hate that more than the coverall. Then what would make it easier? Nothing makes it easier. You just decide what's worth it. Meanwhile, on her side of the floor, the board was tightening its hands. A special committee had been convened ostensibly to review governance practices ahead of the product launch and practice, to draft a no-confidence resolution that would be tabled the day after the launch, if the launch did not go perfectly. Richard Crane sat on that committee. Richard Crane had in fact suggested the committee. He smiled at Scarlett in every elevator and asked, with the gentleness of a man asking after a niece whether she was sleeping well lately. She was not. She was awake at 3 a.m, reading badge logs with a maintenance worker in jeans, and the only reason she had not yet broken in half under the weight of all of it was that the maintenance worker was still there at 4. The break came on a Tuesday. Lucas had been pulling network maintenance records on a low-level server that almost no one above the 3rd floor remembered existed, looking for trace logs from the nights when the unknown cleaning IDs had badged in. He found a backup. He was not supposed to find an archive of camera footage from the 70th floor corridor, kept against policy by a security contractor who had not bothered to wipe his own redundant drives before resigning. The footage from 3 of the suspect nights was still on the drive. On all 3 nights, a single figure walked the corridor at 2:15 in the morning. The face was turned away from the cameras with the practiced angle of a man who knew where every camera was. The walk was unmistakable. Lucas had seen Richard Crane walk past him in elevators for 2 months. He brought the file to Scarlett's office that night. She watched the footage 3 times, her hands flat on the desk, her face arranged into nothing at all. When she finally spoke, her voice came out so even it sounded mechanical. "It is not enough. Scarlett, it is not enough for the board, Lucas. He will say he came up to retrieve a file. He will say he turned his face because he didn't want a camera in it. He has been their friend for 20 years. I am the daughter who took something that wasn't supposed to be hers." Her eyes finally lifted to his. "I need him to do something in public that he cannot explain away." Lucas understood what she meant. He did not like it. "The launch," he said. "The launch. In 2 weeks, Ravenholt Global was scheduled to unveil its newest platform in front of 300 members of the press, the entire board, and a live stream audience of 500,000. Scarlett was the keynote speaker. The board had been counting on her to fail, in front of all of them, to fumble to freeze to give them the public reason they needed for the resolution they had already drafted. Richard had been counting on the same thing, and had probably been making sure of it. "He will have to move on me there," Scarlett said. "If he doesn't, the launch goes well. The no-confidence vote dies on the table, and I keep the chair for another year. He cannot afford that. So he will do something that night. Something he can deny later, but something that breaks me on the stage in front of every camera in the country." Lucas weighed it. "Then cancel. Postpone. Take a quarter. Build the case quietly. Take him out in a hearing room, not on live television. If I cancel, I am admitting I cannot run the company. The board will vote me out the next morning. Richard takes the chair without ever having to come out of the shadows." Her shoulders settled. He has been counting on me being afraid of him for 2 years, Lucas. The only way I take him down is to walk onto that stage as though I am not." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the rule. He thought about the day 2 months ago when he had decided to stop pretending the rule was still his. "Then I will be there," he said. "Lucas, you don't have to. I will be there." She did not argue. She did not thank him either. She simply held his eyes long enough that both of them understood the line had been crossed, and that whatever happened on the stage in 2 weeks, neither of them was going to be standing alone for it. The photograph appeared on the 4th morning of the 2nd week. A freelance reporter, the kind who lived on lobby coffee and other people's lapses, had been camped outside the Ravenholt parking garage for 3 days, waiting for anything. He got it at 6:15 in the morning when Lucas walked Scarlett to her car after she had refused for the first time in any of their nights to send him home before sunrise. The shot was not romantic. It was not even particularly close. He was a half-step behind her. Her hand had brushed the edge of his sleeve as she turned, and a streetlight caught the angle just well enough to make a story out of it. The story ran by noon. Billionaire CEO seen with maintenance worker in pre-dawn departure from headquarters. The photograph filled the top of the page. The caption was politely curious. The comment section was not. By 2 in the afternoon, 3 board members had requested an emergency call. By 4 o'clock, the special committee had circulated a memo expressing concern about, in their phrasing, the chief executive's personal judgment in the run-up to the most important launch event in the company's history. Richard Crane signed the memo first. He did so in his most concerned, fatherly handwriting. Lucas saw the photograph on his phone in the basement break room. He looked at it for a long time, at the image of himself half a step behind her in the dim light, and he understood with a clarity that surprised him that his life had just been moved into a room with no door back. When he came up to her office that night, she was already on her feet at the window. She did not turn when he came in. "I should send you home, Lucas." Her voice was flat. "I should send you home tonight and not call you back. I should let them think you were a phase." "Do you want to?" Lucas asked. "What I want has not been the operative question in this office in 2 years. It is tonight." She turned then. She had taken the blazer off. Her hair was pulled back, and the bruises were back under her eyes, and she looked 31 again, and tired and angry on his behalf in a way that frightened her. "They will eat you alive, Lucas. They are already starting. Tomorrow there will be a story about your divorce. The day after that, your credit report. By Friday, they will have found someone who worked with you 10 years ago who is willing to say something cruel for $200. The board will use it. Richard will use it. The cameras at the launch will use it. And the part of you that has spent 7 years learning to disappear is going to wake up in the middle of that and want to run, and I will not blame you when you do." "Are you finished?" Lucas asked. "No. Finish." Scarlett's mouth moved without sound for a second before she found the words. "Every person I have ever let close has paid for it. My father paid for it. The 2 assistants paid for it. I am not telling you to leave because I want you to leave. I am telling you because the only thing I cannot survive at the launch next week is looking out into that audience and seeing you not there, because something happened to you that I should have seen coming." Lucas crossed the office. He stopped in front of her. He did not touch her. He had not touched her once in 2 months, and he did not start now, because the line between what they were and what the rest of the world wanted them to be was a line he was not going to redraw on a bad night. "I am not a man who has paid much for anything in 7 years, he said. "Whatever this costs me, I have decided it's worth it. You don't get to decide that part for me, Scarlett. That part is mine." Her eyes closed. She did not cry. He was almost certain she had remembered how and was choosing not to. "All right," she said. "All right, Lucas." The auditorium was full an hour before she was scheduled to walk out. Lucas stood at the back of the staging area in a black suit Scarlett had insisted on at the last minute, not because it would fool anyone, but because she had wanted just once for him to see himself in a mirror in something other than a coverall. He looked uncomfortable in it. He looked like a man wearing borrowed armor. The headset in his ear connected him to two private security operators Scarlett had brought in outside the company's normal channels. The plan was simple. He watched the stage. They watched the crowd. If anything moved that should not have moved, he was the one closest to her. From the wings, he could see her at the lectern checking her notes one last time. Charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, the act fully in place. Out in the audience, 3 rows from the front, Richard Crane was already seated, leaning over to murmur something to the board member beside him. He smiled at something the board member said. The smile did not reach his eyes. The smile had not reached his eyes in 2 decades. The lights came up. Scarlett walked out to applause that the front rows performed and the back rows withheld. She thanked the company, thanked the team, thanked the press, and began the keynote in a voice that did not waver once. For the first 6 minutes, Lucas almost believed they would get through it. Then he looked up. The lighting rig above the stage was a grid of motorized housings, each holding a fixture the size of a microwave oven, hung from rigging cables he had inspected with his own eyes the night before. Standard counterweighting, standard safety pins, standard everything, except that one of the safety pins on the housing directly above the lectern was no longer where it had been the previous night. The pin was on the floor of the catwalk. He could see it from where he was standing because the catwalk light reflected off the metal. The housing was already tilting. Half a degree. A degree. The angle was small enough that no one in the audience would see it. The angle was small enough that the rig would let go in 3 seconds. Maybe 420 pounds of metal and glass would come down on the lectern, and the woman at the lectern would never know it had been coming. Lucas was off the wings before he had decided to move. The stage was 20 feet wide. He covered it in 4 steps. Scarlett saw him at the edge of her vision, turned her head the way a person turns toward an interruption, and her mouth had just begun to shape his name when he hit her at the waist and took both of them sideways off the lectern. They went down together hard, his shoulder absorbing the front of the platform, her body folded under his. The housing came down a half-second later. It struck the lectern dead center and split the wood like an axe. Glass burst outward in a low, sweeping arc. A shard the length of a hand drove into Lucas's back just above the hip in a place a man would not feel until he tried to stand up. The auditorium did not scream at first. It made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a held breath, 300 bodies forgetting in unison how to be in a room. Then it screamed. Scarlett pushed up onto her elbows under him, her hair undone, the blazer torn at the shoulder, and the careful act she had carried for 2 years did not come back to her face. She looked down at the blood already spreading across the back of Lucas's borrowed suit, and her hands went to him, and she said his name once, and then she said it again, and the second time it was not a name at all. It was the sound of a woman who had just realized that the only person who had ever stood in a room with her without wanting anything from her had just paid for it on live television. 3 rows from the front, Richard Crane sat very still in his seat. He did not stand. He did not move toward the stage. The cameras caught it. The cameras caught all of it. And on the back of Lucas's torn jacket on the polished black floor of a stage that was supposed to belong to a launch, that was supposed to belong to a vote, that was supposed to belong to Richard Crane, the blood kept spreading. The hospital lights at midnight were the only lights that did not lie. They were too bright, too white, and they did not pretend to be anything else. Scarlett sat in the recovery room in a hooded sweatshirt one of her security operators had given her, the torn blazer folded on the chair beside her, and she did not move when the night nurse came in to check the line in Lucas's wrist. The nurse had stopped trying to send her home 4 hours ago. Everyone had stopped trying. Lucas slept the heavy drugged sleep of a man whose body had decided the argument was over. The shard had missed the kidney by less than an inch. The surgeon had used the word lucky twice. Scarlett had nodded each time, and had not for the entire conversation taken her eyes off the patient on the table. Outside, the city was eating the launch alive. 3 news channels had cut to the footage of the stage collapse on continuous loop. 2 had played it without sound. 1 had slowed it down and circled in red the moment Lucas hit her at the waist. By midnight, the freelance reporter who had taken the parking garage photograph had sold a follow-up think piece to a national paper, and the comment section had finally stopped being polite. Her chief of staff called her phone every 20 minutes. The board had convened an emergency session for 8 in the morning. The committee had moved the no-confidence resolution forward by 12 hours. Scarlett let the phone vibrate against her thigh and did not pick it up. By 2 in the morning, she had decided. She walked to the small window of the recovery room, looked out at the parking lot below, and watched a single news van set up its tripod on the curb. She watched the operator angle a light. She watched a young producer hand a paper cup of coffee to a cameraman. She thought about her father. She thought about the 2 assistants who would not return her calls. She thought about Lucas on the table behind her, who had crossed a stage in 4 steps for a woman who had told him for 2 months not to. When the night nurse came back at 3 in the morning, Scarlett told her very quietly that as soon as Mr. Hayes was stable enough to be informed, the chief executive of Ravenholt Global would be resigning her position effective immediately, and the news could go out before the 8 o'clock meeting if it had to. The nurse, who had not been hired to have opinions, did not offer one. She simply said, "He's going to want to talk to you first, ma'am," and went back out into the corridor. Scarlett returned to the chair and watched him breathe. The decision had not made anything inside her quieter. It had only changed the shape of the noise. Lucas opened his eyes at 20 minutes past 4 in the morning. He saw the ceiling. He saw the IV pole. He saw Scarlett in the chair beside the bed, her hair down for the first time in 2 months, the blazer folded on the chair behind her, her face stripped of every layer of the act she had ever worn in any room of his. "You stayed," he said. His voice was sandpaper. "I stayed." He tried to move. The pain in his back told him not to. He stopped trying. "They have been calling you," Lucas said, because he had seen her phone face down on the table next to the bed and had known somehow exactly what its silence meant. "They have. And you've decided something." Scarlett looked down at her hands. She did not lie to him. She had stopped lying to him on a Tuesday 2 months ago, and she was not going to start tonight. "I am going to resign before the board meets in the morning, Lucas. I am going to take the case we built against Richard, and I am going to hand it to the federal prosecutors and let them do what I cannot do from this chair. And then I am going to disappear long enough that whoever else is in his orbit forgets the shape of my face. That is what I have decided." Lucas closed his eyes for a long second. When he opened them again, he did not look angry. He looked sad in a way she had not seen him look before, and the sadness frightened her more than anger would have. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Deciding what other people are allowed to risk for you. You did it last week when you told me to walk away. You're doing it now when you've decided that the way to keep me safe is to give him the chair. I am telling you the same thing I told you then. That part isn't yours, Scarlett. That part is mine. And it's everyone else who's ever worked under you, and everyone he would have done this to next if he had the chair, and you don't get to make that decision for them either. He almost killed you, Lucas. He almost killed both of us. And he is going to keep doing it to other people if you resign in the morning, because the only thing that has ever stopped Richard Crane in 20 years is the woman in this room." His breath was shallow, but his eyes were not. "You quit tomorrow, and the next person who sits in your office is him, and the next person he does this to doesn't have someone watching the lighting rig. Is that the thing you can live with?" She did not answer. He let the silence stretch because he was too tired to argue, and because the silence was the part she had to walk through on her own. When she finally spoke, her voice was very small. "I don't know how to do this without losing more people, Lucas. You won't lose me by fighting him. You'll lose me by quitting." He found her hand on the edge of the bed and put his over it. Not hard, not gentle, just there. You haven't lost me yet, Scarlett. I am still here. I am going to keep being here. The thing you have been afraid of for 2 years isn't going to happen because you decided in a hospital room at 3 a.m. to be afraid of it harder. She did not cry. She had stopped doing that years ago, and tonight was not the night she was going to relearn. But her hand turned under his, and her fingers laced through his fingers, and she sat with him until the sky outside the window began to gray. At 6 a.m, she picked up the phone, called her chief of staff, and told her in the voice that ended conversations that the 8 o'clock meeting would proceed exactly as scheduled, that the agenda would be the one Scarlett herself had just rewritten, and that the chief executive of Ravenholt Global would be attending in person. The board met at 8 o'clock in the room they had built to humiliate her. Scarlett walked in at 2 minutes past 8 in the same charcoal blazer she had worn to the launch, dry-cleaned overnight. The tear at the shoulder restitched well enough to read as deliberate. Her hair was up. The act was back. But the act was a different act than the one she had worn for 2 years, and the men in the room could feel the difference before she had said a single word. She did not sit. She walked to the head of the table, set a folder down in front of Richard Crane, and waited until the room understood that she was not going to speak until the folder had been opened. Richard opened it. He did not look surprised at the first page. He looked surprised at the third. Inside the folder was every piece of evidence Lucas had pulled in 2 months, the badge logs, the cross-referenced cleaning, IDs, the corridor footage, the maintenance records that placed Richard's private security consultant on the catwalk above the lectern at 9 o'clock the previous evening, 3 hours after the standard rigging inspection had cleared the rig as safe. There was a copy of a wire transfer from a Shell account to that consultant, dated the morning after Richard had attended a quiet dinner at a private club with 2 of the board members sitting at this very table. The copies were already with the federal prosecutor's office. The originals were in Scarlett's safe. She let them read for a full minute. "There will be an investigation," Scarlett said. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had stopped being afraid of this room at 5 o'clock that morning. "You will all cooperate with it. You will turn over your communications. You will not, between now and the moment the prosecutors arrive, attempt to coordinate your stories, because the consultant accepted an immunity offer at 7 this morning, and his statement will be read into the record by lunch. Richard." Richard Crane looked up from the folder. His face had gone the color of paper. "You will tender your resignation in writing before this meeting adjourns," she said. "You will surrender your access to every floor of this building before noon. You will not contact any employee of this company in any capacity ever again. And if any one of you in this room attempts to protect him on your way out of it, I will know within the hour, and you will sit next to him in the same courtroom." She looked at the man who had spent 20 years in her father's confidence, and 2 years trying to take her out of the chair, and she did not feel the satisfaction she had expected to feel. She felt only the quiet of a long room that had finally stopped pretending. "That's the resolution I am bringing to the table this morning. If anyone would like to call a vote on it, I will accept the result." No one called a vote, and Richard Crane reached for the pen at the center of the table with a hand that was no longer entirely steady. By 11 o'clock, the resignation was on her desk. By 1 in the afternoon, the federal prosecutors had walked into the building with 3 boxes and a court order. By the close of the trading day, the story had been pulled off the launch collapse loop on every channel and replaced with the press conference Scarlett gave from the steps of the company headquarters in the same restitched blazer. She did not perform the press conference. She spoke for 4 minutes. She named Richard Crane. She named the consultant. She named the 2 board members who had attended the dinner. She did not name Lucas. At the end of the 4 minutes, a reporter shouted from the back of the steps to ask whether the maintenance worker who had pulled her off the stage was still in the hospital. Scarlett looked into the camera, For 1 second, the act wasn't there at all. "He is recovering," she said. "He is the reason any of you are getting answers today. And the way I run this company from this morning forward is going to look very different than the way I have run it for the last 2 years because of him." She did not take a second question. She walked back inside. 6 months later, the 70th floor was no longer a place anyone whispered about at the elevators. The committee was gone. The shell accounts had been unwound. 2 board seats had turned over. The new hires Scarlett had brought in did not look like the old hires. They came from auditors and labor lawyers and a former federal investigator she had personally interviewed in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building. She had made it a point in the first 30 days after the launch to take a cup of coffee with every floor manager in the company below the executive level, including the night shift, and the people on the night shift had not stopped talking about that for the entire 6 months. Lucas was no longer night shift maintenance. He was not in a coverall either. He was not in a suit. He had landed by his own quiet insistence on something in between, a sport coat over a working shirt, the same kind of boots a badge that said Office of the Chief Executive Special Advisor on it, in letters small enough that he could pretend not to notice them. His office was on the 70th floor, 6 doors down from hers. The toolbox was still on the floor next to her desk. Neither of them had moved it. What he advised her on was not strategy, and not finance, and not the things people in suits advised people in chairs about. What he advised her on was the thing she had hired him to advise her on, which was the part of every room she walked into that the magazines did not photograph. Who was tired, who was afraid, who had not been heard in a meeting, who was about to quit and had not yet said so. He had spent 7 years on a night shift, learning to see the parts of a building that the people in the day shift never thought about. And he saw the parts of her company the same way now. And Scarlett had learned finally to trust someone with the part of the chair she could not see from the chair. They did not announce anything to the press. They did not have to. By the 2nd month, the photographs of the 2 of them had stopped being scandalous and had simply become photographs. By the 4th, the comment sections had moved on to other women in other chairs. By the 6th, on a Friday evening in early autumn, Lucas walked her out of the building after a board meeting that had gone the way she had wanted it to go, and her hand was in his at the curb. And the only camera that caught it was a tourist's, and the tourist did not know who they were. He drove her home in a truck whose heater had been fixed in July. She did not say much in the truck. She did not have to. The act she had worn for 2 years had loosened a notch at a time over 6 months, and the woman who sat in the passenger seat now was 31, and tired, and laughing at something he had said about the way the new auditor wore his glasses, and the laugh was not the laugh of a woman performing a laugh. He thought on the drive about the rule he had made for himself a long time ago, about keeping his head down, about never speaking first in a room he was not invited into. He thought about the 5 o'clock morning he had walked through the wrong door and had broken that rule because the woman on the other side of it had looked like she might break apart if he didn't. What had saved her in the end had not been the case against Richard Crane. The case had only freed her. What had saved her was the part that had come first in the cold gray light of an office at 5 o'clock in the morning, when a man in a stained coverall had stood by a door and stayed for 10 minutes because she had asked him to. And what had saved him had not been the 70th floor office, or the badge, or the name on the door. It had been the same 10 minutes on the same morning, when a woman who had no reason to need him had for 1 second needed him. Some people, it turned out, were not saved by money or power or any of the things the world spent its hours trying to count. Some people were saved by the smallest sentence in the language, by a stranger willing to say it, and a stranger willing to hear it in a room at the end of a very long night. "I will stay," he had said, without ever saying it out loud on a Tuesday morning, months before any of it had happened. "And I will listen." She had stayed too. They both had.